Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second episode of Gamechanger Sessions. I'm Candice Faktor. I'm your host. And as some of you know, I've been a part of the innovation economy for a long time, and I'm really passionate about creating the future that we want. And it is such an honor to have our next guest on this series, Margaret Atwood. I'll start by just saying a little bit about the intention for the series. When about 30 or so days ago, the world started to change in such unprecedented ways, I really was struck by just how much I wanted to hear from brilliant minds and warm hearts to help us really deal and face and think about and make sense of this change. And last week, we had an amazing guest, Adam Grant. You can see his episode on gamechanger.co. And of course, one of the first people I thought of who would just be so important in terms of hearing how they thought about this time was Margaret Atwood. And Margaret is a legend. She needs no introduction to any of us. She's a literary icon. She's a, visionary writer who's written over 50 books of fiction and essays and novels and graphic novels and poetry. She is a inventor, and we're going to talk about her amazing tech invention. And she's really been prophetic in her work around how society changes and can change so quickly if we're not careful. Margaret is an environmentalist, a feminist, a political activist, and a brilliant mind and a warm heart that we're so happy to have on Game Changer Sessions today. Margaret, welcome. How are you doing today?
Very well, and how are you?
I'm
You're doing
good.
well, yeah.
Yeah, I am. It is so great to see you again, albeit virtually, but really lovely to be in conversation. How is this time for you? How has the last 30 or so days been in our new world of social isolation and remote work?
Well, as you know, Candice, writers spend a lot of time alone anyway. But I got back from being abroad on March the 10th. And if you look at the graph of the virus taking off, it really started to go straight up about the 12th or 13th. So I dodged the bullet, went immediately into self-isolation for the required number of days. And now I'm doing social distancing like everybody else. But as for being alone, writers spend a lot of time alone anyway. And the busy part is that, of course, now everybody wants to do remote events. So I've been doing a number of those, including yours.
Well, we're very grateful that you're doing this with us. And, I think one of the things that I think you can maybe help for a lot of us, this is new. We aren't used to being, working from home and, spending this time. And maybe I'd love to hear, what advice do you have for us who are new at this in terms of how we should be spending our time, or how we actually harness the creativity of being working from home?
Okay, so it's not a new thing in the history of the world. We've had pandemics before. They go way, 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 way back in history. And the couple of the biggest ones were, of course, the Black Death, which wiped out about half the population of Europe back in the 14th century, and the wipeout of indigenous nations and communities when the European diseases came over, to which there were no either acquired or inherited immunity. And that's what we're dealing with now. It's a new thing. But growing up in the 40s, we were used to seeing quarantine signs because there were a lot of killer diseases for which we had no vaccines. So lucky people from about the mid-50s on, when all of these, no polio, no diphtheria, no smallpox, all these things that used to kill people. Vaccines were developed for them, and that's our hope here, is to get a vaccine and to get it deployed, because it's a new virus to which nobody has got inherited or acquired immunity. Some people now have, we hope, acquired if they've had it and survived.
Right.
So that's what the end game is: enough acquired immunity and a vaccine. So meanwhile, what are you going to do with your time? You've been handed a great big plate full of time, which you can either spend your time being anxious and worrying, and we all do some of that, of course, but don't spend all your time doing that. You're wasting it. You can do all of those projects that you've been putting off, and I've got a list of them. Today, I think I'll fix a particular draft in my house that I've been meaning to do for years.
There you go. So being productive with this, newfound time, for sure. What are some of the more creative things that you are sort of doing with your time now that there's this force function of virtual connection? I'll give you an example. A friend of mine told me last night she's going to Paris, and I said, "Oh, that's great. I'd love to go too." And they dressed up, they had a Parisian dinner, they watched a film. Are you doing any interesting and creative ways of spending time during this time?
Where would you like to start? So for Mary Beard of BBC Late, I think it's called Front Row Late. So usually they review theater shows, but there aren't any theater shows. So they asked a number of people to come up with something that might be pandemic or plague related and do something with it. So my sister and I staged Edgar Allan Poe's Masque of the Red Death using anything we could find in the house. So Prince Prospero is played by a champagne bottle. The courtiers are wine glasses. And the fortified abbey is knives and forks. So you can see that. I think it's coming up pretty soon. I think it's the 16th BBC Front Row Late. So we did that. We also made some very snazzy face masks. And we are right now, myself and a group of other people are planning to do the online gala that we usually do in person. It's a bird-related event in the middle of May. So it's May the 9th, 7 to 8:30, and we're trying to incorporate all the features that we usually do in person, including the rubber chicken choir. So you can either watch it free live streamed, or you can buy a useful ticket, which will make you eligible for the door prizes. We always have some pretty, what shall I call them? Unusual door prizes. And we'll have a silent auction, and we will even have a meal, because all of our usual guests and pals and friends are submitting recipes, and we will have the usual drinks and nibbles. We will have the appetizer, we will have the main course, we will have the desserts, we will have the bread basket, and you will be able to get the recipes and cook along ahead of time, and eat along with us at the Spring Song and Pelee Island Bird Observatory Gala, and you can find it at pibo.ca. So join us, bring your own rubber chicken. We only have 2 numbers that we do. Old MacDonald had a farm, and
I love that. And
bye Blackbird. So practice up.
Okay, I will literally put that in my calendar right now. But I think that's like a really interesting thing, because I've known Margaret for our guest on the show since I was at Wattpad, and we used to call you our fairy godmother, and not only did Margaret introduce us to the who's who of the entertainment and literary world, really helped us understand that nothing that we were doing was new at Wattpad, even though it was a very futuristic storytelling platform. And I remember with such fondness, the conversations we used to have around the future of storytelling. And I guess, hearing you talk about this sort of new way of doing something that isn't new, how do you think entertainment, is going to change as a result of this force function of COVID? Like, what are people, going to do differently? What's these new formats that, like you're talking about, are going to be more important in the future?
Well, I think you're going to see a lot of amateur theater of various kinds, do it yourself. And you're also going to see some strange moments while people get their handle on the technology. We've already seen up on YouTube some YouTubes of people who forgot they were online, running around without their underpants, without their trousers on. So that's entertainment of a kind, sort of inadvertent entertainment. There's quite a lot of that going around. So I think you'll find people exploring these platforms and making new things out of them. For instance, the National Arts Centre in Ottawa has got a performers show that they put out, and I think they're going to be able to do plays on it with the actors in different locations, but with a split screen that allows a number of people to be seen at the same time. It'll have to be a particular kind of play. But I think it'll be more like sort of chamber music, not a lot of huge crowd scenes. So you're going to see some of that. And we got onto that platform too. So the book launches that they would have been doing this spring in person are going to be taking place online to the best of people's abilities.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what about things like virtual reality? Do you think this is a force function for people to adopt virtual reality? I mean, I know you're an avid traveler, for example. Are you going to be traveling to places in virtual reality if this doesn't,
Yeah, you and I were exploring virtual reality some time ago, and exploring whether it would be good for theater, whether it would be good. What it's really good for is travelogues.
Yeah.
So traveling and seeing different places. But in order to do that, you have to kind of have somebody in the other place. You can use it with pre-recorded film and video, etc. But I don't know. We'll wait and see. It would be good for that if you could do it without actually having somebody travel to the place.
That's true, for sure. Now, one thing that you are exceptional at is connecting with your fans. And we've talked a lot about that over the years. I mean, I remember in 2013 or 2012 even, you had 400,000 followers on Twitter back then. Today you have 2 million. And we were talking about how important it is to have this relationship with your fans. And I'm imagining that being virtual or social isolation, are you spending more time with your fans now using Twitter or less? Like, how are you thinking about virtual connection?
Well, constant. Candice. Candice. It began with a C.
Close.
Okay, I'm going to have to learn Facebook, it appears. So up until now, I've been able to post things on it if it already had a button. But usually it's run by my publisher. So I'm going to have to figure it out because we have some Facebook Live stuff coming up. And I'm going to have to know how to work that because there isn't any handy person standing right behind me telling it's the red button. The one in the middle. No, not that one. No, don't push that. Like that. So I'm going to have to do that. I've recently I kind of know how to do Instagram,
Mm-hmm.
and I know how to do WhatsApp. So some people are doing online things with WhatsApp, so I have to do that. And FaceTime is pretty easy, except you have to figure out how to prop your phone up and, you know,
But I
like
think
that. Or
sure, outside of the tactical, this idea of staying virtually connected has always been a big part of what you've done so well with your fans. And I
well,
remember many years. Yes, sorry, go ahead.
it was I was an early Twitter adapter just by accident, Candice, because I was doing a book launch in 2009 when publishers were all running around screaming because of the financial meltdown. And I thought, okay, unless I do this myself, it's not going to happen. So we did a book launch that was live performances. And as part of the website that we built, we had a Twitter button. And I said, what's that? And they said, it's really easy. So that was an exploration. And there weren't that many people using it at that time. This would have been 2009. But it was very useful to let people know what was happening and to show them bits of what we were doing. So from then on, it has gone on. And the early Twitter was quite benign, but you could see that it developed a dark side. And Obama won the first election that he won, I think, because he knew how to use social media, and his opponents had not yet figured it out. But now they have, and we've also seen it being used to spread fake news. We've been seeing it used to disrupt elections and to cause various kinds of panics, spread false information. So there is no human technology that does not have a less desirable side to it. So there's always a good side, a bad side, and a stupid side that you didn't anticipate. And when the internet first was developed, everyone, isn't this wonderful? We can educate people. We can, everybody can be connected, etc. And that has actually tried quite hard to keep the negative out. You know that was an effort, and they're continuing trying to keep the negative out. But there is a lot of negative on the internet once you start looking. So it's not all funny.
There's no doubt. And I think that's what's so relevant right now, right? Is in a world where we're being forced to use a lot of these virtual technologies and connect virtually, there's the intended impact and then the unintended. And
and there's also deliberate malice,
And there's deliberate malice. And so in this world that we're now living in, a post-COVID world, what role are you excited for technology to play still? And, even in innovating to actually help solve COVID, we had a company in Canada, Spartan Biosciences, that can do very rapid testing for COVID. That's great. But how are you thinking about the technology that can help us and hurt us in a post-COVID world?
Okay, so virtual connection is it's not a physical thing, and what is needed right now is a physical thing, namely a vaccine. But true information can be exchanged very rapidly, and that's what the internet was developed for in the first place. It was developed by scientists so they could exchange their findings very rapidly and use one another's findings to further explore and develop. So that's happening. And think how long it used to take to develop and discover things and develop them. Right now I'm reading this book called The Body by Bill Bryson, and it's really informative because not only does it tell you about your various body parts and who knew that bones make hormones, but it tells you how these things were discovered. And a lot of times it was just by accident. So that's the past. This is now. Because people can share information, they can build on things much more rapidly. But because they can share information, they can also share false information. So what people are really looking for is trusted sources of information. Like, who do you trust? And the person who's risen to the top in the United States is this Dr. I think Fauci. Is that how you pronounce it? Dr. Fauci is very, very trusted. And I think, certain people that you might not have thought that of before have actually shown up fairly well as far as making decisions and calling the shots, including guess who, Premier Ford. And the person who really has really shone is the Prime Minister of New Zealand, because they got that thing shut down really early. She was obviously listening to the scientists, believing the scientists, and acting on that knowledge. So that's what you need. You don't need a bunch of people who don't believe scientists. You don't need those right now.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you brought up New Zealand, because yesterday there was a Forbes article that was posted that said, what do countries with the best coronavirus response have in common? And it turns out many of them are women leaders. So if you look at Denmark and Iceland and Finland and Germany and New Zealand and Norway and Taiwan, they're all female leaders. And I was curious what you would have to say about that. Why is that?
You've got a temperature. You're not going to school today. You're going to stay right here and go to bed. And here's some ginger ale. So there's nothing. I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with anybody. It's just a cold. Okay, see the difference. I know there's something wrong with you, and you are staying right here, and we are going to see what that temperature means, etc. So I think it brings out the Florence Nightingale.
Yes, I mean, it's a really interesting juxtaposition right now in the world when you look at that, and the numbers are, hard evidence of deaths, right? Which is really, really interesting. So let's go back to technology, because we have a lot of people on this call who are really interested in innovation. And, one thing I remember from many years ago was this invention that you created. And it was, when you explained it to me, I was like, that's interesting, but I never really understood how interesting it was until this very moment of being in a world that is socially isolated. So it's called the Long Pen by Synagraphy. Let me know if I'm saying that correctly.
Okay.
And
I'll spell it.
You can spell it. And what the idea was, at least I remember when we were in conversation, was that your fans wanted you to sign books around the world in real ink, in the speed of light, in instantly. And you invented something that allowed people to do that. Tell me more. Tell us why you invented that and what its relevance is right now in a world that is socially distanced.
Okay, so I invented it back in 2004, and I shouldn't say that I invented it because I did not do the technology that enabled it to work. I had the idea. I asked some techie friends of mine, does this exist? And no, it didn't exist. I actually thought that the FedEx person who comes to your door with the thing you sign, I thought that signature was flying through the air and coming out the other end in the form of ink, which it wasn't. But so I said, could it? So they looked and they said, no, this doesn't exist. The closest thing to it is remote surgery, but which was already happening then. But you don't scribble on the body. Remote surgery is very slow. You can't actually write with it. So we started out constructing prototypes and proofs of concept. We went through 4 of them. The first one was very creaky. The and not very accurate. The second one was very accurate and fast, but it was too fast and it blew up and flew across the room. So we couldn't use that. Then we invented one that was very accurate and fast, but it was too big. It wasn't scalable. You couldn't make it small. You couldn't make it small enough. It was sort of like this. And
Right.
then we finally arrived at the one that we had. So the idea then was there's all of these cities and countries where authors are never sent by their publishers, either because they're off the beaten track or the population isn't big enough or all of those reasons. And those people never get to have live author events. So I thought, why can't we do it remotely? At the time we were doing it, none of the technology that enables us to do it the way we do now existed. So
Right.
our first iterations were big boxcars full of equipment and separate cameras. There weren't even cameras in your computer. There were no iPhones. There weren't even, I don't think, any laptops. So we went on from there, and it turns out to be one of those things like Velcro. So the man who invented Velcro didn't know what it was for.
Right.
But
Yeah.
we know now that there's all these uses for it. So the book business, for whom I originally invented it, sort of went meh. We did have Norman Mailer going from New England to Scotland. We did all these things around the world, but nobody knew mail it. And the book business said more or less, why don't we just send the author there? And I said, what about the places the author can't go? Well, they didn't really care about that. So it's more something entirely different. If you go to www.syngrafii.com, you will see that it's the signature company. So it now does everything. You can sign digitally, store digitally. If you need a wet signature on a physical contract, you can do that via the long pen. It's all biometric. It's all recorded. It has the video signing room in which I could meet with you and your lawyer and my lawyer and a notary, all in different places. And we could go through initial and execute a contract. We can show that it's us by uploading our identification right into the document. And you can go on to that platform and explore all the things that it does. And of course, it's taking off right now because lawyers can't meet with their clients. People in businesses don't want to get together in a room and be coughed on. You can do all of these things, and they've just made it so in Ontario that you can execute wills remotely. But of course, in order to do that, you have to have a witness. You have to have actually two witnesses, and you have to be able to prove that that was you, that those people were you. So no other signing thing which you could actually lift the signature and paste it into another document. That's not acceptable. It doesn't meet compliance. So we are now in use by mortgage companies, insolvency companies, a lot of lawyers, you name it. And I've been using it, of course, for years because I travel a lot and I need to sign stuff. And it's very simple. It guides you through the document bit by bit. You can't miss signing on a page the way you can with the physical one.
That's amazing. I mean, I think it's just such a testament to how forward thinking you've always been. And, one of the things before we open it up to questions is just, Margaret, your work has always been so prophetic. And when I say that, it's in the sense of, I wonder if that's the right word, but it's a warning, because you've helped us imagine what has already happened in the world, in the possible future. You always have a view to what we must be aware of could happen in this world if we're not careful. And I'd love, in the context of COVID and in a reality that is so different, instead of asking you to predict, which I think is obviously flawed, maybe you can kind of give us two scenarios. One, a warning about what we should be mindful of not happening in the future. And two, a hope of what you hope this will actually do for our future.
Okay, what we should be mindful of in the future is paying attention to the reports that scientists did at the time of SARS, and the people in the epidemiology area have always known. You need to be prepared. What happens when hospitals get overwhelmed? What happens when you run out of healthcare workers because some of them are dying the way they did with SARS? What happens when you run out of equipment for them, as you have seen? So we could have been much better prepared for a pandemic event, which scientists had been telling us for decades was very possible. All you need is a new mutation, and viruses mutate very, very quickly. All you need is a new mutation for which we don't have immunity, and which has a somewhat delayed time between the time you're infected and the time you show symptoms. So if you showed symptoms 2 minutes after you got it, we would all know who had it. As it is, we don't know. And we don't have enough testing equipment, and we don't have enough protective gear, and we don't have enough hospital beds. So next time, be prepared, just as the Boy Scouts used to say. So that's the warning. The hope is the opposite of that, which is we will be prepared next time, because we have seen how quickly something like this can travel, and how colonially it spreads, by which I mean one person gives it to 3 people, and each of those 3 people gives it to 3 people, and pretty soon you see that line on the chart just going straight up, which is what happened.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have one last question for you, and then I'm going to hand it over. I've got like a ton of questions coming through on our Zoom of people who want to ask questions. But one that I know is really dear to your heart and has always inspired me. Somebody said to me, COVID is Mother Nature's way of sending us to our room. And I thought that was very apt and very relevant, especially for something you said recently on another podcast with the New York Times, which was, this is a reset moment for nature. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what you think this means for conservation and stewardship in the future as well, because I know that's important to you.
Yeah, so if you want to see a big overview of it, there's a book by Barry Lord, Lord, called Art and Energy. And he walks us through human history, through each energy source, including fire, including slavery in the Mediterranean area, which went on for thousands of years, big source of energy, wind and water, and coal, which was a culture of production. So all of the theories about workers owning the means of production, all of that kind of thing, the labor movement, etc., came out of the large numbers of people needed to run the coal industry, which is where the energy was coming from in the 19th century. Then along comes oil, and oil is quite cheap to produce, and it doesn't use a lot of people, comparatively speaking. And it produced a culture of consumership, which is what we've been living in since, I would say, 1950. I can remember when everybody's coal furnace rattle, 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 bang, went down the coal chute, changed over to an oil tank. Okay, then it changed to, a lot of it has now changed to natural gas, and a lot of it to electricity, but where does that electricity come from? So we are seeing a transition to renewables, and renewables, says Barry Lord, produce a culture of stewardship. We know that things run out. We know we're using them up at a frightful rate. You can get this book by Hope Jaron, who wrote Lab Girl. She's now written a book called The Story of More. So how we got used to having more of everything in Western society, not everywhere in the world, but more of everything, and what that more is costing us. So culture of stewardship will say, we can't keep living this way. We're depleting the resources of the planet at a far greater rate than we are renewing anything. And we have to get into the stewardship and start renewing things at a much greater rate than we are now. And there are projects all over the world that are doing that, but there are not enough of them yet. If you go to a website called Project Drawdown, you will see all of the things that we're doing today that if we did more of them, would cause carbon to be drawn down out of the atmosphere at the point at which we are drawing down more than we were giving out. So that's one piece of the puzzle, but it is not the only piece.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what you eat? Yeah. What?
No, go ahead. I was just going to say, I would love to chat even more, but I'm so aware I have hundreds of questions coming for you on our Zoom, and I want to give all these people a chance to ask at least a couple of them. So thank you. And I think your comments on the stewardship are so important as we see the world taking its foot off the gas during COVID right now. So I'm going to throw this to a question I have. First question is, it can be easy for leaders to get everyone's attention, but do you have advice and suggestions for people not in a leadership position that want to make a difference?
Wow. That's a hard one, but I would say you can't do everything. Leaders, of course, can issue commands and other people do the stuff, but you as an individual cannot do everything. So focus on one or two things that you can do. Otherwise, you're going to feel really overwhelmed and you will get depressed because you will feel, I can't do all of these things. I'm not making enough of a difference. So focus on just a couple of things that are within your reach that you can do. And that could be in the area of helping other people. It could be in the area of nature conservation. It could even be in the area of sustaining programs or entities, even your local restaurant, that you hope will be there when this is over. So help them get through this period. Buy gift certificates, renew your subscription to whatever it may be. Maybe it's the ballet, maybe it's a concert series. So you can do those things now on your computer. And a number of your favorite restaurants, see if they're doing takeout. You can go there, social distance. They're filled with hand sanitizers. It's all sanitized, and they give you your dinner in a paper bag, and out you go.
Absolutely.
So keep them going. Help them keep going.
Yes, absolutely. And I think Adam Grant, who's our mutual friend who was on our show last week, he actually said, generosity is the antidote to anxiety, right? There's like evidence basis for that, which I think is really interesting. I have another one here, which is actually very much in that line, a question for Margaret regarding mental health and creativity. During these challenging times and amongst all this chaos and uncertainty, mental health issues such as anxiety and depression are on the rise. Is there any advice you can give someone who could be having a hard time tapping into their own personal creativeness during this time?
Okay, so it's not all about you. And the more you can take your mind off your anxiety about yourself, whether it be writing a novel in which you're not thinking about you all the time, you're thinking about the characters in your book, or helping other people, you're also not thinking about you. You're taking all that anxious energy, because it is energy, and moving it outward away from yourself. So I think if you can find a way of doing that, you're going to be much less anxious. Paint a
Really
picture.
helpful.
You'll be thinking about the picture. If
Sure.
you want to make some Play-Doh, I can tell you how to do that.
I love that.
You can make some little Play-Doh things and bake them in the oven.
Yeah,
Baking. A lot of
absolutely.
people are baking. They're
I will say
baking, they're
I'm,
gardening.
yeah, just doing
You're
creative
doing some
projects.
baking? Yeah.
Yeah, it's the first
Yeah.
time. You don't want to see what my cakes turn out like, but I am trying for sure. So here's an
Practice
interesting
makes
one.
perfect.
Yeah, exactly. There seems to be a fascination with dystopia, even before COVID-19. And hang on. The Handmaid's Tale is obviously a great example of this. Do you see this fascination deepening in pop culture, or will the pendulum swing actually to something lighter?
Well, you always have a choice of something lighter, and I think a lot of people are watching movies that are funny because, again, it relieves the anxiety. So comedies, I think a lot of people are turning to them. Um, sure, dystopia, but this is not a dystopia that we're living in. A dystopia is an arranged, controlled, unpleasant world. So
Mm,
man-made or human-made societies that are arranged to be very unpleasant for some people.
mm,
Whereas this is a sort of man-made phenomenon, and no, it was not invented in a lab. It's a
mm-hmm,
natural phenomenon, and it produces some unpleasant effects, but it's not a dystopia. It's not a designed world. It's
mm-hmm.
the opposite. It's a piece of anarchy that came in out of nature.
Mm-hmm.
So
I
sure,
think
we're interested, but what these books do for us is they show us characters moving through these kinds of situations and um, figuring out ways of handling them. And that's of course what we all want to know. If you really want to go back to the dystopic world, you can go back to Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, the Alec Guinness
right.
version. So before the fall of the Iron Curtain, those countries would be what a lot of people would call dystopian.
Right. I think that's a really profound difference for people to sort of really understand, right? Because I think for a lot of people, they're trying to make sense of what this is, and that's a really great piece of insight. So I'm going to have my last question here, which is somebody says, "Thank you for sharing your time and wisdom. I always think that you have phenomenally strong, complex female characters in your books. What aspects of the female spirit do you think we need to tap into to become our own heroines during COVID-19?"
About the same as any human being, really, um, which is some of the things that I said. Don't panic. It doesn't help anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Roll up your sleeves, get it. And as for the female part, uh, access your inner Florentine. If somebody's got a temperature, maintenance, stay at home.
I love that.
No,
Access
you are
your
not all right.
That's really great. Well, Margaret, we could go on for a long time. I will say I'm getting a lot of people asking if you will share a recipe on Twitter. So please go ahead and do that if you will. They're very
Okay.
interested in cooking and baking with you.
Okay.
Um,
What sort of recipe? So
I
bread,
I will tell people
cookies.
to tweet.
Okay.
Okay, I will ask people to tweet a whole bunch of different kinds that they're interested in. And in all seriousness, I just want to thank you so much for your wisdom and your insights and your perspective on how we can make sense and cope with this very interesting time, and your warnings on the future as well as hopes for our future coming out of this, and for really helping us imagine what the world could be like as both a warning and as an opportunity. So, Margaret, thank you so much. I do want to say that we've made a donation on your behalf to the Peely Bird Conservation organization that you mentioned, and we certainly would love to watch the play that you are going to produce. So we'll share that, and just thank you for being who you are in this world and for sharing with us today. So thank you for joining us.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you. Always.
Thank you. Wonderful. Well, we are so delighted. That wraps up our conversation with Margaret today. And before I go, I do want to say there's so many people I want to thank for making this happen. This was an idea we had, just for people to know, like not even 2 weeks ago. And we have an incredible executive producer, Corey Marr, who's making these happen, and Marone Tadass, who's working with him on helping us produce these. So thank you guys so much. And Ether Live joined in to make the production really spectacular on a virtual chat. So thank you guys. And Guy Mintes for his beautiful music that I know the song, I have it here. Hang on one second, called Delve. Thank you for that. And to all of our partners for sharing this with their communities. So that's Toronto Life, CBC, Artery, which, Margaret, you have to check out this platform. It's a platform that allows people to do concerts in there and art in their homes and share that. So I'll send that your way. Artery, who else is there? TechTO, BOMA, York University, and Elevate. So thank you, everybody, for partnering with us to bring brilliant minds and warm hearts like Margaret to our community in these really interesting times. Have a great day.